Cool. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our monthly webinars. So this time we're looking at cool things you can do with GA4. So we've probably got roughly about 45 minutes or an hour or so. Will and Chris, if you can answer sort of questions, I can't really sort of see them as I'm sort of going through this. So, quick bit about us. So we're an analytics specialist agency based near Bristol. I'm actually going to be at Measure Camp, which is this coming Saturday in London. So I'm traveling down there on Friday. So if anyone's heading to that this coming weekend, reach out. So this is a bit of a sort of practice round for that, and just a chance for me to sort of tweak some of these pieces within here. Here's some of the clients we work with. They're across kind of all sectors, both in finance, lead gen, e-commerce. Generally tend to be kind of big beasts, such as like Rentokil or Nat Geo, and we've been doing some stuff with some big charities at the moment. So Christian Aid, we're in the middle of a sort of a deployment for, and then Revitive, we're working through them at the moment. So we obviously mainly do Google Analytics and GTM and GA3, GA4 migrations, but also involved in sort of CRO, A/B testing, and basically trying to get more value out of your data, and use it to make better decisions. So just one other thing, just before we kind of go into the GA4 sort of use cases, we did cover last month. We covered GA4 Setup Mistakes. If you haven't caught that, please kind of go through it. There's some good kind of tips within that, and then we're sort of finding more and more kind of gotchas with GA4, either pieces that are missing from it or things that don't necessarily work as they should. For example, adding virtual page views, you have to actually add them as an event, not as a page view configuration tag. If you add it as a second page view configuration tag, it ends up trumping the first one, and you end up with weird results. So little things like that are kind of ones to try and avoid. So in terms of kind of tips and tricks, so this is not an extensive list, and some of these are kind of brainstorming a bit as well. The first obvious one is using the BigQuery linking within GA4. We're doing a lot of stuff with integrating with HubSpot at the moment and the HubSpot API, and some really kind of juicy stuff within HubSpot, some great stuff within Google Analytics. So we're in effect using BigQuery to tie connect the dots together, and also as some ways of getting around the HubSpot's premium, or the cost of HubSpot, which is not cheap. However, the API for it is exposed for free, so it allows us to basically get around that issue with HubSpot. I don't have any specific examples to show you on this webinar regarding that, but maybe for next month I'll add a slide for the results of that. The other thing to note about the BigQuery sort of piece, which is a bit of a hot topic at the moment, is cardinality. So cardinality is something where you might have seen in GA3, where if you had too many like URLs or too many parameters, you saw everything grouped under other. It basically means your database size is too long, and it says I'm just going to cut off after, I don't know, 50,000 rows or something like that. So GA4 also has cardinality. The problem is it's triggered in a slightly different way. It's triggered not by necessarily the number of rows, but the number of variations. So if you have things such as a CRM ID, which is very common, because you want to be able to kind of analyze that information, be it within HubSpot, you have to account for that, and either have two GA4 accounts, one where you're sending your CRM ID, which is going to have crazy cardinality, and then a second one where you don't, and then that basically gets around it. So I guess my tip on this one is, if you are storing a CRM ID, use a GTM server side to collect 2 different GA4 accounts, one with CRM IDs turned on, the other without. So you basically have a profile where you don't have cardinality and one profile where you do. So another kind of tip here on GA4 is hourly reports or hourly alerts even. So GA3, it used to be 24 hours after you got an alert triggered. So this is like an email alert. So GA4 now has hourly, which is great because if you've got, let's say, a website outage or site's gone offline or whatever, you get alerted straight away. Rather than like midnight the one day after. So potentially very useful in the sense that you don't need pingdom anymore. You can just set up an hourly alert to say, traffic is less than, or sessions is less than this threshold. Email me straight away. So nice little kind of a takeaway and add-in kind of feature, potentially quite actionable and useful. The other one, another type of alert is anomaly detection. So this is more of like a custom alert for anomalies. So you might have seen on tools like Outlier.ai, or there's actually certain Google Sheet plugins which allow you to work out or look at anomaly detection. So Google have introduced a way of setting a custom alert that triggers if a certain anomaly is present. So for example, so that the original alerts that we had there, like the hourly alert, would be based off just one thing, like has sessions changed or has conversion rate changed, be it compared to last month or versus a particular threshold. Whereas anomaly detection is using multiple like data inputs to determine if it is an anomaly or not. So the aim here is to try and rule out things like seasonality or like email campaigns that cause spikes and more intelligently detect anomalies. So this is Google trying to allow sort of machine learning to be used for insight and analysis. So one that we've added or suggestion or here is creating an anomaly for something like a spike in daily revenue. Another one, a very useful sort of feature, if you haven't sort of got this turned on, you definitely should have, especially for e-commerce, would be to activate the predictive audiences. So this would be if a user is likely to buy, then you can target those users. So in GA3, you used to have smart lists, which is like engaged users. In GA4, you've now got, especially within e-commerce, the ability to target these potential transaction users, and this is data based not just on data from your own site, but other kind of data sources that Google kind of knows. So a really good tip: turn that on to basically be able to target high-value users that are not transacted. There's one other one which is not in there at the moment, which I'd like to see, which is the ability to target users that have a very high revenue over their lifetime, and people are similar to those users. So basically, you might have heard the expression, 10% of my audience make maybe 90% of the revenue. It's targeting those users and finding users like that. Obviously, you can do that with customer match, but that would be the kind of the next one that I'm hoping they're going to kind of add into that kind of native list. We've just got a quick kind of alert. So I know Chris, if you want to sort of put a link in the chat for a GA3 to GA4 like migration kind of calculator.
Sure.
So obviously, if you need to migrate from GA3 to GA4 before July next year, when it all stops working, we can sort of help with that. And we've got some templates both for GA3 data layer kind of mapping to GA4 that speed up that process, and we've also got some like good Data Studio reports which also help with the analysis of GA4 data. Also, if you're needing to kind of switch over your AdWords goals to GA4, we can also sort of help with that process, and the same with Google Optimize. So the other sort of tip in here was sort of funnel analysis, and the ability to do sort of time-based funnels. So you can say if a user has done this, then that, then render them in this funnel. So much more kind of flexibility. It's not just the sort of the standard kind of item add to cart and purchase, but sort of almost like a time decay, but in funnel form. We're still kind of playing with this a bit, so I don't really have a sort of a custom report to sort of share, which is ironic because you can't share custom reports at the moment. So, but we'll provide some links when Google actually allow us to share those reports. The other one was I'm going to sort of skip over, was just time decay sort of funnel steps on here. And then another one, which is a really good use case, which is something you couldn't do in GA3, is to create an event when a user does a particular action. It's almost like if you've got a segment that you've created in GA3 and you want to say, okay, if this segment happens, send an event. So that means that if a user, let's say they've like scrolled and hovered over a button, and you want to like send an event or do something, so invoke a particular action, then you can in effect turn an advanced segment into an event, which is quite potentially cool, because then you can say, okay, trigger an overlay, or send put them in a particular like Google Optimize kind of group, or basically do stuff after something has happened, which kind of opens up a lot of kind of functions and sort of features. So quite potentially sort of powerful. The other one, which was a common problem with GA3, was sort of spam in and like non-human activity. So Google have pretty much potentially given you the option of ruling that out by creating a measurement secret. So this is a bit like a secret key. And then if you generate that key, which is a bit like a random number, and then add that into GTM with all of your hits or tags, etc., that are being sent, then you basically mean that you're not going to get any sort of spam sort of traffic. So great, they've solved that problem, and as part of your GA4 migration, you should turn on this feature to improve data accuracy. The other one was about sort of the use cases for consent mode. So in GA3, consent mode doesn't really do that much. In GA4, there's support for, in effect, sort of conversion upscaling and taking the sample of users that have opted out of cookies or not clicked accept within enough time, and using that to scale back up to the 100%. Really potentially useful feature in the future. If you give the example of Facebook, which sort of was in a change to like a 10% opt-in model when Apple kind of sort of changed the goalposts within iOS. It's an example of where you really need a kind of a sampling upscaling, or client-side sort of sampling upscaling for both sort of sessions and conversions. So super useful in the future, and an actual good use case for where GA4 has quite a good advantage over GA3, and because obviously no one likes underreporting on conversions. The other sort of cool feature in GA4 is the Debug View, and the ability to see a real-time stream of all of your activities. So you may have used tools like Data Slayer just to see what's kind of happening in the browser, but this is actually the processed information. So it's what Google Analytics sees and processes. This is quite handy. So where you're trying to work out, our particular like to give an example, we were debugging consent mode on with browser extensions, and on that you actually see the pixel being sent, but it's not until you actually get into the interface and see that it's not actually processed that pixel. So in that case, where you're using the real-time sort of stream of Debug View, you'd actually see that it's not processed that. So it's quite useful to basically get the processed information and use it for debugging. We normally recommend splitting out GA4 into a live and a development profile, because there's still going to be instances of where you just want to see traffic from development, but this means that you get to see just your stream of information in quite an easy to use kind of way. So a nice kind of GA4 feature. Another GA4 specific or only feature, if you're on Merchant Center, they've now allowed automatic linking from GA4 to Merchant Center. Very cool. Couldn't do it in GA3, or at least not easily. So it's a one-click to link and enable, and then you can access that data, Merchant Center data in GA4 for like your product impressions, product clicks, all that sort of stuff. In the same way that you can access Search Console in GA4 in the interface if you link it as well. So a great cool sort of feature. Another one which is quite timely, if you're like me and you've had like 100 email alerts this morning from Google sending out warnings about content security policies, this one's for you. Google at some point, they haven't released it yet, is going to introduce a European data center for GA4. It was announced on Google's privacy webinar about a month ago. They then realized that actually, in order to create a European data center, they need to silo the pixel requests from European users. And the best way of doing that is actually to do it within the browser, as in when a GeoIP lookup happens, it then says, okay, you need eu.googleanalytics.com. So the problem is a lot of people that have previously been using content security policies, and those are ways of whitelisting resources like JavaScript files and images, haven't actually whitelisted eu.googleanalytics.com. So there's a risk that GA4 rolls out and it suddenly stops working for anyone in Europe. Because of that, they've literally just this morning said basically add whitelists for googleanalytics.com for image and script. The ironic thing about the email they sent this morning is those regions 1 and region 2, that potentially might change, hence why it's much better to use wildcards for those two. Obviously, content security policies it's not ideal to use wildcards, but if you do restrict it to those two domains, it should be fine. Obviously, hopefully Google actually tell us what the subdomains are actually going to be, and then we could not need to use wildcards. But quite a good tip if like me, you got an email this morning. If you want if you want help setting up a content security policy that's going to work with GA4 with Europe and doesn't pass data to America for processing, then reach out to us or reach out to Sarah. This was probably actually more on the tips for what features GA3 or GA4 I wish it would use or introduce. So I think some of these we might have shown last week, like for instance, Regex goals is one that is still kind of missing on the list, which is ironic because it makes it much harder to migrate a GA3 URL based goal, which might be using Regex, to a GA4 modified event goal, which obviously you can't currently do, which is kind of annoying unless obviously you use GTM. So I'm hoping they're going to introduce kind of Regex goals. So my tip would be when they introduce that, it would then be possible to do an API based migration for destination URLs to GA4. Obviously you can do event based migrations already. I'm going to jump over to the next one here. And this is kind of both a tip and also a discussion point. is if you've within GA4, obviously it's quite easy to turn on the automatic events. However, it doesn't automatically add something like a mail to or a tap to call. So my suggestion or tip here is to create a modified event. So go in and say if an event is a link listener or link click, then the value, the page location starts with mail to, then create a modified event called mail to. The same for tap to call. So it's great that they've obviously turned on these automatic collection, but you then have to convert it into an event in order for it to show in reports as a conversion. So quite important to do that, especially if it's a lead gen kind of website. The other one is GA4 doesn't actually support JavaScript error reporting as an auto event. So it's quite a good one to send in. However, I wouldn't suggest sending it into your main GA4 report. The reason for that is you can't do non-interactive events in GA4. So instead, my suggestion with JavaScript error tracking is either keep it only in GA3 for the next year and a bit, or use GTM server-side and route within server-side so that JavaScript error goes into a development only sort of profile. Obviously, you need to be very careful with GA4 that you don't declare two different GA account IDs on the same page. Otherwise, the last one ends up sort of taking precedence. That's kind of a sort of note on that list. And obviously GA4 doesn't support kind of AMP at the moment. We're waiting for a solution for that. So those were some of the list of sort of features that you can use or benefits in GA4. There were some but I'm kind of keen to hear what use cases you've got and what you've been a cool kind of examples. So I'm going to just sort of jump into questions, or just look at the questions for a second. And
don't actually have any questions as of yet, but if you do have any, try put them in the Q&A section instead of the chat, because it's easier for Phil to see it that way.
Cool. All right. I'll and okay, while we're waiting for that, we'll just mention the sort of a migration checklist. We've just got a form which is if you want to know like how quickly we can do a GA4 migration, just sort of fill in that form. And the other sort of note, if you want to do a free migration for GA4 and really quickly, and we've added an option in sort of the pro version of our cleaner. So if you go to gtmcleaner.com which, or will, if you put the link in the chat window, and then click on the pro version, which is the little green button on there. And then in the options on the pro version, if you expand that advanced, it will say migrate GA3 events to GA4. So that programmatically updates GTM and basically does a lot of the work for you. So this would be if you've, and I don't recommend migrating anything that's an auto event. It's really like custom events that you want to sort of migrate. So stuff that is that will basically give you two options: one to migrate all your GA3 events GA4, and also there'll be another tick box on there for GA3, which is recommended auto events. So please try out that tool. It just creates a separate workspace. You can revert the migration, but yeah, let us know what you think about it. We've got another tool for consent mode that we're working on at the moment, which we're going to roll out soon. So keep your ears out on that one. The GTM Cleaner will basically migrate those events for you. It does a bunch of other sort of stuff, which I think we've got to explain a video, which probably explains it more clearly than I will, which I'll sort of play in a second. And then we've also got a Chrome plugin which exports any tables within GTM. So your table of versions, or if you've got a lookup table variable, it will export that and makes it easy to kind of edit and like import back in. And then we need to write that blog post. So that's a kind of list of some cool things within that you can do within GA4, and I'm just seeing if there's anything else that I've kind of missed off from that list. And we didn't really talk about historic importing of hits. So one thing that came up actually today, a client asked me, what about if they want to import their transactions for the last year? Because obviously GA4, they've just added to their site. Potentially, the answer is yes, it's possible, because GA4 supports historic timestamps. So there's nothing technically stopping the import of a bunch of like historic transactions. So a really good use case of where by Google opening up historic importing, there's the ability to use it to do historic like data population. And the other sort of one, I kind of want to open it up for questions really, rather than me sort of talking. So Tristan's have asked a question, features are missing from e-commerce, or a topic on that. Yeah, so there are some within the GA3 to GA4, there's some, I wonder if I stop sharing my screen for a second, I can show you. Let me just pick an example.
We're open to any other questions as well. So if you have any, just pop them in the Q&A. We'll try to get them answered.
So Tristan's question was about migrations. So here, if you can see this lookup table, this is a standard GA3 like event. So for something such as a detail click impression or purchase, so you can map those to GA4 or equivalents. So so for instance, like in most cases, they just convert into sort of snake case, or from camel case to snake case. So for instance, promo view becomes view promo. I don't know why the views got moved the other way around. And in this case, there is a one-to-one mapping. However, there are some features which don't map from GA3 or are not in part of enhanced e-commerce. So things like an add to wish list is a new one. We've got add and remove from cart, but not a view cart, which is also new. And sort of begin chart, checkout, add shipping, add payment, etc. There's not an obvious like one-to-one mapping for those. So that is something where you'd have to add an inline data layer value into your GA3 data layer, so that those additional features would kind of be shown. Someone's asked, is it possible to downgrade from GA4 to analytics? Wow, that's a good question. I suppose why would you want to? You wouldn't necessarily want to, in the sense that it's going to stop working in a year and a bit's time. The probably more relevant question would be, can you get GA4 to look like Universal Analytics, as in the interface? So it is in theory possible to send all the data into BigQuery and then use BigQuery to build a new UI. Or if you're going to do that, you could even use Snowplow and see if someone's got a UI running on Snowplow, which looks like a GA interface. But yeah, I mean, yeah, ultimately, I'd probably suggest using both. They're doing a hybrid, so you've got GA3 and GA4 running, and then you get the benefits of both worlds, at least for a year and a year and a bit. The other questions. Looking to export data as an Excel file this week and couldn't see a way. Could have missed it. I want to get weekly grouped data of sessions and new versus returning in the same way. Okay. I mean, obviously, you can just one obvious thing on that. You can export any data from GA4 into Data Studio, and obviously, Data Studio has an Excel export within it, so that would definitely work. If there's not an Excel export, I would have thought it would be. The piece that I'm missing at the moment is there's not a native plugin for Google Sheets that does a GA4 to Google Sheets. So that I'd be nice if Google kind of introduced that, because then you wouldn't need to use Excel, you can just use Google Sheets. If I hear about a free one, I'll let you know, Tristan. Features downgrade. What about a view replacement feature? Yeah, that comes up a lot. So in the free version of GA4, there's no way of filtering the data within the tool. So you can't do profile views. Unless you want to pay for GA360 for sub properties, which most people don't want to pay, $150,000 ish. So the way, and the other problem which makes it harder is obviously GA4, there's no way of setting a tracker name for dual trackers, which GA3 did support. So the solution, the only reliable way around it at the moment is to use GTM server side, and then within GTM server side, you split the GA4 page view and event data, so it goes into one profile, and then you have a different profile for your, in effect, other views. It's not ideal, because if you've got, let's say, 10 profile views or filtered views, you're going to have to create 10 GA4 accounts. But it's the only sort of free way to do it at the moment, until such time as they make sub properties free, which I've not heard. I don't think they're going to do at the moment. The other option is to do slicing and dicing within the GA4 API, and you in effect create Data Studio reports with a drop down for like host name. So in effect, your Data Studio reports becomes like your profile view reports. Got a question here. User type does not exist anymore. In the API Query Explorer, there is a new versus returning dimension, but in Explorer, it's new versus established. Both have different logic. Why would Explorer be different to the Query Explorer? Also seeing not set here for new versus established. Ooh, that's interesting. I've not encountered that problem. It could sounds more like a possible bug, and I suggest submitting that in the feedback report for GA4, as in the bottom of the screen it'll say click here to submit feedback. Although I'm surprised that a field such as user type for new and returning, that sort of bug I would have thought would have got picked up fairly quickly. So the only thing I would think would be if you're using a particular dimension or query that you're running when you're trying to generate a new versus returning. In the past, there had been restrictions when you tried to look at the count of users and new users. And by doing so, when you added those certain metrics, they restricted what you could query. So my only thoughts there are, like, what query are you running, and could you try just doing a numerous returning and sum of sessions and sum of users without any other groupings, and just see if that then returns results without kind of like a not set value, and just see if it's the query, not necessarily the data. How do you suggest tackling historic data for GA3? I mean, we're still kind of working to see if anyone's going to come up with some clever suggestions for exporting information from GA3 into GA4. Be nice if Google introduced like a server-to-server migration, that's what they did when they had GA Classic to Universal, but I've not heard of any reports of them doing that. And the only thing they would be able to really migrate over would just be the page view data, because the events obviously are a different structure. Is it possible to export GA3 data for the last 2 years? Potentially yes, but you need to do it in batches so you don't hit sampling. And it's possible to upload data in GA4 somehow. Again, potentially yes. You'd have to be a number of different imports. There are certain things that you can't import at the moment. So in GA3, if you look at the import sort of list, if I just quickly bring it up and compare that to the import like table list on GA4, you'll see like there's like only 2 things you can import on GA4 at the moment, I think. Let me just pick an example. So just getting the 2 screens there. So on here, so this is your GA3 sort of import list. Obviously, everything within here is set to like query time on the free version. So it's going to be the date you upload it. So with transactions, you couldn't do historic refunds, etc. In GA4, you do obviously have user ID and event kind of imports, but there's not. I think actually, yeah. So the on the product one, so there's no geographic import for a start. So the that one sort of disappeared, and when I was trying to import page ID. Or information attached to a page ID, I hit certain restrictions on that because it wasn't one of the keys that Google supported for an import, only user ID, client ID, and like daily sort of cost data. So on that one there, if I try and yeah, so there's certain pieces that are kind of missing from the puzzle from that. So you can see on here it says metadata such as brand, category, or variation for product ID kind of widening. But if you've got a custom attribute such as your product ID, cart ID, doesn't even have transaction ID kind of in this list, you can't currently kind of widen to that. So if you're exporting from GA3, you could import your user ID data, but you then need to import your transaction ID data, which you're stuck on, and you wouldn't be able to widen page IDs to content groups. So there's a few kind of pieces missing from that make it harder to be able to kind of do that migration. Let me just go back to questions. Where can I find bounce rate in GA4? Well, apparently bounce rate is coming back, and it's going to be exposed in the interface quite soon. Alternatively, you can use engagement rate, which is potentially more useful because it's accounting for events and other sort of interactions, not just sort of page views. And how do you filter out internal traffic? Again, should be something that should be quite easy to do. It's a lot harder. So normally, again, if you've got a host name filter, you want to really sort of separate that out. So if I show you an example here, is dev. So we would normally we'd normally split out the development and live using a list of, in this case, 7 lookup tables. So when we look up the container ID, host name, if you've got debug mode open, and if a URL parameter contains the word test in the URL, if that much is to true, then we would route GA4 into a different profile. So GA4, so on here, we do the routing of any development traffic to this ID and any live traffic to the, obviously, the live one. That's the simplest kind of way of doing it, and similar to GA3, because it silos the data between the two. There is a way of flagging or doing an exclude for if you've got, in effect, debug mode true, then you can do something similar to something similar to this, where it basically sends it. You can say either put this in show it in the debug stream, or exclude this traffic. And then you can do the same with IP addresses. You can exclude them. However, IP address exclusion is not particularly accurate, because GA4 will automatically anonymize the last 3 characters of an IP address. So pretty much guarantees that your an exact match is never going to work for IP address exclusion. And obviously, if you've got anyone on a sort of fast internet connection with a V6 IPv6 IP, it's not going to work as well. So routing using a lookup table list is probably the best way of doing it for now, especially because you can't do excluding of URL parameters for test or such. So basically, just do it within GTM for the moment. Actually on just on that internal one, Analytics Mania did a really good video on how to exclude internal traffic and some kind of workarounds for it. We'll find a link to their video afterwards. Regex appears to work differently to UA. Really, that's new. For example, using a funnel report in Explorer and using the Regex for a page. Is there no documentation on this? So Regex, the Google Analytics Regex, there are certain nuances to it. So for instance, you don't need to escape forward slashes in Google Analytics Regex, whereas in standard Regex you do. My suggestion for Regex would be try Rubula, which is so that is this one. So this is using standard kind of regex, and this will allow you to test your expressions and see if they work. This is going to be loosely the same as what Google Analytics uses. If you're saying that you see different results in the funnel, the only thing I would just check for is you're not using a special character. So something like /s, that means was it a white space, I think it is, and then W is a word. So if you're using one of those special characters by accident, that might cause like the results to display differently. But yeah, as far as I'm aware, Regex should work the same in the funnel reports for GA4. I've not encountered any instances of it being different. Regex I've used for in GA4 doesn't. Have you got an example, Gemma, of the Regex? If you can send me what you're doing, and then I might sort of see as to what could be the possible kind of issue. And also, normally, if there's an issue, it would say this Regex is invalid. So I kind of need more information, and also the URL that you're trying to match to. Yeah, okay. Chris or Will, have you gotten any other sort of questions or sort of things that you've that I've forgotten to mention?
No, it's just all that I'd say is, yeah, just if anybody has any recommendations for the articles that we're writing, they're more than welcome, and you can get featured in our articles online.
Cool. Actually, I've got a request. So we're trying to get feedback on the GTM Cleaner tool, and we really want to kind of improve it and make it as good as possible. So we're going to just give out like a £25 Amazon voucher to someone that posts the best feedback or suggestion on the tool. So given that there's like 20 people on this webinar, so you've got a pretty good chance of winning. So if I post a link to the feedback in the chat, and if you could try out the tool and basically tell us, like, be brutal, to tell us what's good, what could be, and what feature you like, and ideally what feature we can improve, or what existing feature we can improve within it. And the best suggestion we'll give a £25 Amazon voucher. We might need your email address for the voucher, but the feedback is just on here. If you click new post and just let us know what's good on that. Will, have you got a link to the video which explains the tool to hand?
Yeah, I'll just find that now. Bonus points if you give us a good review on the tool.
What is this on? You mean the Chrome App Store for the? Or
yeah, well, no, if you just mention the tool online, sharing is caring.
Well, we'll probably do a live or recorded demo at MeasureCamp on Saturday. So I'm probably not going to do a live demo now, just because but I'm just seeing if also just in the attendees, how many people are actually going to be at MeasureCamp London this weekend, and also what are you talking about? So that's I'll put the link to that, which I'll be at.
Kristen will be there.
I think that's everything I wanted to sort of cover. I've kind of gone through this a little bit in draft mode. So we may do, when we do the presentation on Saturday, there'll probably be another recording, and we'll probably add any pieces that we've sort of missed or we just need to kind of expand out on, like the HubSpot kind of a use case example. All right, thanks everyone. Hopefully there's some bits and pieces in that you learned or found useful, and we'll sort of catch up again in a month's sort of time. All right, thanks everyone. Cheers. Bye bye.